Imagine Congress passes a law telling someone they have to do something by a certain deadline, a set deadline, or else. And then you ignore it, and then you ignore it again, and you keep ignoring it. That is basically what Donald Trump is doing with the TikTok ban that was passed by Congress. Brian, why don't you tell us a little bit about TikTok?
What's TikTok, Sean? Is that a clock? Is that
You're
some kind
not
of a
you're not like
clock operation?
you don't have a big following on TikTok. You're not famous on TikTok. You don't have like dance videos and stuff. All kidding aside, TikTok is a social media app owned by a Chinese company, and we'll talk about what Congress decided has to be done with it. I'm Sean Pernican. That's Brian Kabatek. This is Civil Action on the Legal AF Network, and today we're talking about Trump's endless extensions of the TikTok ban and him disregarding Congress when it's convenient for him. So tell us a little bit about the TikTok ban, Brian.
Yeah. So before anybody starts thinking that I'm a complete idiot, I know exactly what TikTok is and I know what the law is that was passed into law. It's called the Protecting Americans from Foreign Adversary Controlled Applications Act. I had to look at that and read it because it's so long. It required by the 19th of January, the day before Trump was sworn in as president, for there to be a sale of TikTok. TikTok, as probably everybody knows, is a platform that is owned by the Chinese. There's grave concern in this country that the Chinese were using TikTok to spy on Americans. I'm agnostic. That certainly could be true. I know that there's a lot of people, including Donald Trump, and we'll talk about that, who rely on TikTok and use TikTok and have monetized TikTok. But the idea here is that the Chinese owner of TikTok, who I believe is a company called ByteDance, had to sell it by the 19th of January, 2025. That law was actually upheld by the United States Supreme Court after it was challenged by ByteDance. And what has happened since then is the day Trump came into office, he extended by 90 days the deadline to sell TikTok, which, by the way, Sean, was legal under the statute. He then extended it a second time, and very recently he extended it a third time on June 19th. He extended it for another 90 days, so it's scheduled to run in September. So he has violated the law, in my opinion, at least twice by extending the law twice. And I think one of the things we're going to talk about here today is, can the president simply violate an act that was passed by Congress and signed by, albeit another president, into law?
Well, and before we get into that, what do you suspect his motivations are for extending it?
Well, that's a very good question, Sean. And so I've done a little deep dive into that. And first of all, I don't think you need to do much deep dive into this to understand that Trump relied on TikTok for his ability to reach and manipulate, in my opinion, younger voters. Particularly during the summer of 2024 leading up to the election in November. It was heavily used and it was heavily relied upon by younger voters and his influence into younger voters and the so-called bros out there who ended up voting for Trump thinking that they were going to get something special in exchange. I also did a deep dive into whether or not Trump is still using TikTok to monetize any of the many things that he's hucking out there to the public, that he's trying to sell to people.
Like Trump perfume or
Trump cologne, Trump's wildly expensive watch. I can't find any direct evidence of that. It doesn't mean that it isn't being used to sell those products, but I can't find any direct evidence of that. I think he also uses as a platform to put out his visions and view of America to try to influence.
Yeah, I think it's just a means for him to reach an audience, and I think he would love to go after something like this. Oh, the Chinese are spying on us, and I'm going to stop them and make himself. But then he's kind of looked at that, and that seems pretty attractive. But then probably his campaign folks have told him, wait a minute, Don, you can get a lot. This is a lot of influence that you're going to be giving up. This is a lot of manipulation you could do of voters and young people. So he's looked at it on balance and he goes, American interest, national security, national interest versus, me having influence. What do you think's going to win? Which one of those is going to win for Trump? I'm sure it was a close call for him, right?
Yeah, I don't think it was a close call for him at all. I think, Shanta, though, what's interesting is let's discuss for a minute just the basic principle of laws passed by Congress and their enforcement effect once they've been signed into law by the president. Where does
Yeah.
that come from?
I believe that comes from the supremacy clause, right? That Congress gets to dictate in certain areas, and the laws set by Congress must be followed in the areas within which they legislate. And I don't think there's a big dispute about whether or not the supremacy clause is something that applies and how it applies, right? There isn't a big fight.
It's Article 6 of the Constitution, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
It's very clear. Laws passed. You don't get to pick and choose which laws you and I get to comply with. We don't get to say we're going to give ourselves a 90-day extension on, a tax increase or something like that.
Right.
Right.
Right. Yeah. And what are the consequences for noncompliance? I mean, I know that specifically in this statute, there's some. I think if it's, by the way, it's not just. It doesn't have to be a sale. It's either banned or it has to be sold. And I think the statute has like a $5,000 per user type of penalty. But aside from that, let's put this specific statute aside or this law aside. What are the consequences for not, enforcing or complying with a federal law that's passed by the federal government?
You mean for the other 320 plus million people in the United States, or do you mean for Donald Trump?
Sure. Yeah. Well, over here, it's Donald Trump that keeps granting the extensions and doing favors to a Chinese company.
Well, I mean, the penalties, generally speaking, can be criminal. They could be civil. They can be fines. There can be injunctions. There can be court orders requiring compliance. All of those are potentially on the table here. And although this is not a criminal violation, it certainly is a civil violation. It's a violation of the law. They haven't done it, but their argument would be they're operating under color of authority, that authority being that of the president of the United States, who keeps giving them these, 90-day gifts.
And I think some Democratic senators have come out and said that he lacks the legal authority to do this, to give these extensions. I think the statute had a one-time extension exemption built in.
Exactly. Right? I think I said that already. It did have a one-time 90-day extension, and that's been used. He's then done it twice since then. Who knows if he's going to do it a third time in September. Now, here's what's interesting about this, though, Sean, is that there is no record of any effort to enforce. Now, the first level of enforcement, where would you expect the first level of enforcement to come from, Sean?
Or the district courts?
No, the Justice Department.
Oh, well, you mean who would come in to enforce it,
Correct.
right? Okay, yeah. I would assume that the first level would be the DOJ coming in front of a district court and seeking to enforce it, right? Not immediately into the Supreme Court. They haven't done it. How come they haven't done it?
Well, because the president's directed him not to do it. And Pam Bondi, of course, follows his direction. So whatever he says goes. And who knows, Pam Bondi, who has a history before she became Attorney General of the United States of being a lobbyist for various interests. So maybe she's sort of, feathering her nest for at the end of the Trump term, or when she gets fired, to go out and lobby for the Chinese or some social media company or something like that. So she's refusing to enforce it. She's directing her department, pursuant to the president's order, not to enforce this.
Competitors could also try to come in and enforce it, right? Other people who compete in the same area, whether it's Facebook, Meta, Google, or Alphabet, whatever their names are, they could come in and try to enforce it, but they have chosen not to.
Right. So there's nobody out there right now enforcing it, and the general public doesn't have standing. Now, it's possible that a nonprofit, that a pro-democracy organization would enforce it, but they're not enforcing it. So the president isn't enforcing it. The Justice Department isn't enforcing it. Mark Zuckerberg isn't enforcing it, probably for obvious reasons. So no one is out there actually enforcing this. No one's requiring this. Now, and I just want to give kind of my final thought on this topic right now, which is the Republicans, the conservatives, the neocons, they're all, anti-Chinese. They all seem to talk about how bad China is, how much, despised they are, the tariffs, et cetera, et cetera. But yet they seem to be giving something where there's a specific finding about the Chinese involved in TikTok. And like I said before, I don't know that's true, but let's assume it is. And they seem to be giving him a hall pass. And the only conclusion I can come to is this is because Trump has such a grip on them that they're just going to do what he wants.
I think that's right. And ultimately, I think the motivations here is I don't know if you were kidding about Pam Bondi having, looking for a lucrative lobbying contract with a Chinese company or a tech company.
Half kidding.
Yeah, I know. I think there is some truth to that. I think it's not unreasonable to think that there's truth to that. And I think this is motivated by self-interest. I think like everything Donald Trump does, everything is motivated by self-interest. Like I said, I mean, this is and was an issue of national security. That's why Congress passed this. And I think by extending the deadline to enforce this TikTok ban, Trump is basically bypassing the separation of powers, encroaching onto what Congress can do and legislate in. And he's unilaterally suspending a law written and passed by Congress because of self-interest. I think because he sees it as a necessary and important critical channel for him to put out his message and seek re-election for a third term or some other bullshit like that. And he just sees this as something that favors him personally. So he's very hesitant to do that. And there is some personal angle here that he's pursuing. That's my theory about this. And I think this is a super interesting issue. It's an important issue. It implicates national security. And I think it's important that we keep an eye on this and seek to enforce it. I mean, that's what democracy calls for. But thank you for tuning in. I'm Sean Kernigan. That was Brian Kabatek. This is Civil Action on the Legal AF Network.
Can't get your fill of Legal AF? Me neither. That's why we formed the Legal AF Substack. Every time we mention something in a hot take, whether it's a court filing or a oral argument, come over to the Substack. You'll find the court filing and the oral argument there, including a daily roundup that I do called, wait for it, Morning AF. What else? All the other contributors from Legal AF are there as well. We got some new reporting. We got interviews. We got ad-free versions of the podcast and hot takes. Where? Legal AF on Substack. Come over now to free subscribe.